What's up, you guys, and welcome to another episode of the Ask Alex Show. And today I have a very special interview. If you guys remember back in 2019, I interviewed him way back as I was getting started with my channel, revamping my channel, and I had to bring him back towards the middle end of 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to reintroduce you guys to no other than the most amazing podcaster in this space. You've seen him on his own channel, Robservations. You may have seen him on the Schmodown. You may have seen him on Collider. You've even seen him recently on the John Campea show. I would love to introduce Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. How are you doing today, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett?
Man, it's so good to see you. I mean, it's always nice to I feel like when you go on a YouTube journey, you sort of inherit a family, like an extended family that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I mean, I talked to you back when, like we were talking earlier before we went on the show. I don't even think I'd moved into the Robservatory yet. I think I was still streaming from our laundry room when I first started out. Elizabeth bought me this microphone, and I'm streaming from our laundry room. Because
I remember during that time you had just started collaborating with John, so y'all would do the webcam thing before you moved into the studio.
No, it's true. And that was after John Schnepp had passed away. And he was the first person that said to me, he put the bugaboo in my head about doing a YouTube channel. And he had said he's when I would go into Collider to do Heroes, I didn't really get to know I'd known John Schnepp before, but I didn't know John Campea, and I didn't know anybody else. I didn't know Harloff, and I didn't know Mark Ellis, and I didn't know any of the other people that work there, like Roxy or Emma Fife, and I really liked everybody. It was fun to go in there, but I didn't really get to know them, so I'd come and go, and we didn't hang out or anything, so I didn't really get to know people over the years except for John. And when Schnepp passed away, it was because we had done hundreds of episodes of Heroes together, and for 3.5 years, and it was a real blow. But he was the one who said, you're always so positive, you have an interesting take on all this stuff, you should start your own YouTube channel. And I was like, really? I don't know. And then Elizabeth bought me this microphone. She goes, it's time. This was after John had passed away. It's like, you should start your own YouTube. And I'm like, what am I gonna say? Cut to thousands of hours later.
Right.
Or
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, I've just talking, and it's funny because I didn't know. I mean, I've tried in my own mind, being on YouTube is the equivalent of going to a great comic book or science fiction convention where there's a lot of great panels. And I grew up going to conventions where I would go listen to people talk about the minutia. Like I told you before I came on the show, I was at Home Depot buying some sprinkler stuff for our new lawn that we put in. And I was actually listening to a YouTuber. It was the very first time I ever listened to her. And now I'm drawing a blank on her name. She is a comic book. This is the very, let me find this because I can find it and tell you what her name is. Because it was, again, even though I've been in this space now, I've been doing YouTube almost in December. I think it'll be 9 years or something, or maybe in April. And I'm constantly finding new people to watch. There's because there's tens of thousands of people, but even in the space that I belong to, I don't know why I can't get to there, but I'll get to there. And I'll cite her name. But I was listening to a really interesting video she was doing about the character Punchline. This Joker character. And it was really interesting. And I'm like, wow, this girl really knows her stuff. And I'm like, I'm subscribing to this channel. So I'm finding new people to listen to all the time. And it's just great stuff. And I can't get enough. Her YouTube channel is Casually Comics. Casually Comics.
Shout out to Casually Comics. If you're in the chat, definitely drop a like for the video, and definitely love to collaborate with you as well. But yeah, like to your point though, I'm seeing new creators and new brands rising all the time. Not necessarily brands, but just podcasters who just love the movie, comic book, pop culture space. And it's actually very inviting and actually very cool to have our own little small community. And by the way, anyone who's commenting live, we will definitely show your comment on the video as well. Shout out to Martino, shout out to Andy. He's asking a question which we'll definitely address sometime in the show. But before we address, if you guys have any questions for me and Robert, we'll address those for about the last 5 minutes of the show. But I did want to jump into the interview because, like I said, last time I interviewed you was back in 2019, and you were with John Campia, and also doing your own show.
Yeah.
Now you've kind of like been focused on observations, and a lot since that time, a lot of things have happened. You know, we've gotten obviously COVID happened, and
Yeah.
we had like theater shut down. We also now have the writer strike going on. We have a lot of things we're going to jump into, but a lot of things have happened in that short period of time. But I wanted to ask you, what was the biggest transition for you personally when you decided, okay, I'm going to limit my appearances on Campia and even the Schmodown and focus on my own platform? What was it like fully transitioning into what you wanted to do?
Well, that's a really great question. It's tough because during all this time, COVID happened, you know, and we've seen I had, obviously we were in the midst of, it was a different president. We had COVID. We had all kinds of different things. And I think there's other things personally, like, you know, I'm getting older. So it's like, what do I have to say to young fans? Like, can I talk to Star Wars and comic book fans who are saying their early 20s or even in high school and college? And would they even want to listen to me? You know, who's my audience? And that's another thing. I mean, I know that predominantly my audience is between 25 and 45, which is interesting because that makes me significantly older, a decade older than my audience. But the one thing that I've discovered is that because I've been a fan my whole life, there's so much knowledge that I've just accumulated simply because, you know, I'm interested in everything. And when I grew up, I was really a hardcore fan, and I loved science fiction, fantasy, and horror, whether it was in books and comics and movies and television. I loved music. I loved, you know, pop culture and music, and not so much fashion. I mean, the way I dress, you would never know that, but I'd like to be fashionable. But I just never had, you know, I'd rather spend money on Hot Toys figures. And like, if I could, I would wear Italian linen suits my whole life. But one, I would have to be thinner, and I have to work out all the time. And two, I'd have to have a lot more. I'm like, should I buy this Moon Knight action figure and the new Moon Knight omnibus that came out, or buy a new nice jacket? And the answer to that question is, I'll go for the omnibus and the action figure every time.
Right.
But then I realized that, you know, I guess my childlike sense of wonder stuck with me. And I didn't know, the real thing to any creator has to ask themselves is, like, there's a lot of people that want to get online because they want the attention. And I understand that. But the thing is, how are you going to keep people's attention? Because whenever you do anything, whether you're making a movie, whether you're making music, if you're creating a comic book, you're making it for your audience. And people can say, well, I write for myself. Well, if you're putting pen to paper or you're putting fingers to keyboard, the idea that you're only doing it for yourself is silly. You want an audience, I would think. And so if you're going on YouTube and you are talking into the void, then you want an audience. And if you want an audience, you have to earn your audience. And then if you've earned your audience, you have to keep your audience. And what was interesting is I didn't know what that was like. I didn't know who the audience was going to be. I didn't know what they would take away from me. And I didn't know if they'd keep coming back. Because if you're going to go on, that's the only way you have a YouTube channel. I mean, if I was doing YouTube shows and there was like one person watching, I would feel, and it'd probably be my mom. It would be depressing. So what I realized was what my brand was, and my brand, which my audience taught me, my brand was sort of my exuberance and love of all of this material. The fact that I think I'm mostly, unless I'm talking about modern Star Trek, positive about everything, because I love stuff so much. And I do love Star Trek. I just don't love the current era of Star Trek. And the thing is, that's always been true of like my favorite comic book runs. You know, you read a comic book and your favorite creator, your writer artist team would leave. And then you're like, damn it. And somebody would take over and you're like, what is this shit? You know, and then you'd still read it because you liked the comic. And then you'd get another writer creator team that came on board that you would really love. And I felt that's been true of most things. So I love Star Trek as a franchise, just like I love Star Wars as a franchise, and I love the MCU. But when things get not so good, you know, I think if you're going to be critical of something, you should be intelligently critical of it. And I think that's what I realized I tried to do, was I tried to bring my enthusiasm, but also my critical acumen, and then my professional, the fact that I've been a journeyman in the entertainment business for so long. So I actually have some insight to share there. And that was something that developed. I think anybody who has a YouTube channel, when you first start out, your channel develops over time until you figure out what is your niche and what is it you're bringing to your audience. So that's kind of what really changed for me, especially over the first 100 episodes of Robservations. Year.
And what I've loved what you've done with Robservations, and then the whole channel actually, because it's like it's grown so much where now you have co-hosts, you do different shows, and before we jumped on live, we were talking about just diversity and storytelling, and I've always said that watching you online, whether you were on someone else's channel, on your own channel, you've been a huge proponent of just diversity in film in particular, especially comic book and Star Wars and Star Trek and other different types of things. I wanted to ask you, since we're going into this, I guess, this new wave of storytelling with the DCU with James Gunn. I remember you saying once before, like before we got an announcement that James Gunn and Peter Safran were going to be leading the DCEU, you said that that as of right now, we don't know who could lead it because there isn't anyone who checks all the boxes like a Kevin Feige. But now that we got like James Gunn and Peter Safran, do you think that they will incorporate more diversity in terms of storytelling from what we've announced? Because it looks like the stuff that they've announced back in like, you know, during the pandemic at I think I forgot the Comic-Con, what it was called. I think it was called DC All Access or something like that.
Oh, was it DC Fandom?
Fandom. Yeah. So like apparently a lot of that, aside from what was already come out, some of the stuff that they announced I guess they're gonna scrap or go on the wayside, like Batgirl, things of that nature. So do you think that James Gunn and Peter Safran, with the launch of Superman Legacy and future projects, they're going to be able to court that very diverse element in their storytelling with certain characters?
I think so. I really think that what James Gunn has, here's the thing about James Gunn. He's worked in many different genres, and unlike anyone else, you know, he came out of independent cinema. He worked for Troma in the 90s, like working on things like Tromeo and Juliet. Then he came on board and he wrote scripts for like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. And then he wrote like Scooby-Doo. And then as a filmmaker himself, I work with him on a movie that he wrote and actually was one of the principals, a superhero, really low budget superhero movie called The Specials. That it was directed by why am I drawing a blank on his name? The creator of The Walking Dead with Neil Druckmann. Craig Mazin. Craig Mazin directed The Specials, and James Gunn wrote it, and he played Minute Man. And I think that James Gunn we've seen a little bit of his flavor in movies like Slither and movies like Super, and then of course Peacemaker and The Suicide Squad, and then of course all three Guardians movies. But people are looking at his sort of sense of humor, which pervades all of those things, his dark sense of humor. But I also think that James Gunn understands classicism, like a classic. I think he wants to bring back the mythic nature of Superman. Now, but not the mythic nature that, say, Zack Snyder. Like, Zack Snyder loved that Alex Ross operatic mythic look at the DC heroes, where everybody was, it was very important, you know, and you look at these images of gods and monsters and conflict, but it was very, you know, I used to say it was like the cover of a 70s prog rock album, or it was metal, dude. That was just, his Justice League movies, metal. And I think everybody understood what I said when I said that, but James Gunn, I think, is going to bring back more of, I don't want to say Norman Rockwell, but more of a more classic Americana, that whole truth, justice, and the American way. So I think it's going to be halfway between like a Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series and Richard Donner's original 1978 Superman, specifically the beginning, the first 30 minutes in Smallville, where, you know, you see those American vistas of the wheat fields and small town football games and hot dogs, and you're going to have that moving into, and it's going to have a certain, you know, to me, and this, I have no reason to necessarily believe this because I have no knowledge about James Gunn's, but I think as somebody who's around, we're about the same age, you know, he grew up reading 80s DC comics. And 80s DC Comics was very interesting because on one hand you would have Frank Miller doing the Dark Knight Returns, but then you would have somebody like Jim Aparo drawing Batman and the Outsiders, which was Batman with this wacky team that fought really wacky villains like the Nuclear Family, you know, and it's going to be somewhere in between that. And that, so you're going to know also that the world that Superman inhabits is full of metahumans.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's going to be, if anything, and I have no reason to believe this, but I keep thinking that James Gunn is going to bring us the 80s DC universe. And this is going to be a pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths DC universe, when things started to go more dark. Like, or when mythic, like George Perez took over the Wonder Woman books and really brought back mythology into Wonder Woman. So I think it's going to be somewhere, I think it's going to be tonally very different than anything we've seen both in the, I mean, the MCU kind of did that, especially in its first 3 phases. But I think that James Gunn's going to be more whimsical. Kind of the same way, I mean, what he was able to do with Guardians of the Galaxy. He's not going to go, I mean, he made bold choices in the Guardians movies that everybody loves, like the whole thing about I Am Groot. You know, and making that work. You know, and making Rocket Raccoon work as well as Rocket Raccoon worked. And let's have a dance off. You know, like, it's amazing. I don't think he's going to go that far. But he is going to bring back that element of fun. He's going to somehow figure out a way to take very classical Americana moments and then inject them with that modern whimsical thing that he's got going on. But he'll also be able to take it dark when he needs to. And I think also that he's going to learn how to manage, like, at the same time Batman and the Outsiders was running, DC was also running Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. And those existed in the same universe, you know, and if you go back and you look at 80s pre-Crisis Justice League comics, you know, you had the Detroit era when Martian Manhunter took over, and you had like Vibe and characters like that. So I think he's going to figure out a way, because look, what people don't understand, I don't think people quite get, because now you have, on one hand, I appreciate everybody who loves the Snyderverse, and I really love Man of Steel, and I really enjoy, to be honest, I really like Zack Snyder's 3, call it his Justice League trilogy. The Man of Steel trilogy, you know, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and his version of Justice League. I really like those things, but those movies, for everybody who loves them, I wish people would recognize that those are very off-putting to a lot of the audience. You know, when you have young Lex Luthor leaving a glass of piss on a desktop for Holly Hunter to drink before she gets blown up.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not the kind of movie that all members of you can't take your kids and you can't take grandma to that movie.
Yeah. Very adult. Yeah.
It was very adult, and the mythic nature. It was a really interesting take that I really enjoyed, but it wasn't for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that James Gunn is going to want to return the DC universe to kind of a combination of Richard Donner's Superman, Tim Burton's Batman, but then at the same time, the more of an MCU accessibility that he was able to bring to Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you say that, I picture like the old animated Justice League TV show where you had your dark moments and then you had very light in tone moments where you did see Superman go dark versus when he got mind controlled for a certain amount of time, and then you saw Batman being Batman, and you saw all the characters uniting. So I'm very interested in what James Gunn's going to do, especially with their DCU and then their Elseworlds. One of my criticisms I've said before, because I know it was announced way before James Gunn became the head, him and Peter Safran, that J.J. Abrams is doing a Black Superman movie, and I love Black characters, and I know that particular Black Superman is basically another Earth Superman,
right? It's like it's Val-Zod or whatever. If they,
yeah. So like for me, I was like, instead of doing that, why don't you utilize like the milestone characters like Icon? Like Icon is like, he is another version of Superman, just stronger, in my opinion.
I got to tell you, I don't understand. I love the Icon shows. I mean, they did the Static Shock animated series. I mean, the Milestone universe, and I bought all those comics when they first came out. And Dwayne McDuffie was married to my friend Charlotte Fullerton when he passed away, so I was able to meet Dwayne McDuffie, who was a great, he was a huge dude. He was like 6'8" or something. He literally was a giant, like in stature. Such a nice guy. And I love the Milestone universe, but I agree with you. I mean, those were characters, they were created by Black creators.
Right.
And like, to me, here, the idea of a Black Superman could be fine, but then the problem is you have to deal with, how is a Black Superman different than a white Superman?
Right.
And when people would say, well, it doesn't really matter, I'm like, well, then why are you making a Black Superman?
Exactly.
And then you have to deal with, like, okay, how would Superman, if Superman came to Earth, like if he landed on Earth at, like, in Smallville in 1985, like, he's going to grow up with, by the time he's 10 years old in 95, he's probably really into hip hop.
Right.
And whether it's Wu-Tang Clan or Eric B. and Rakim or whatever, Rakim and his lyrical flow. So what would that Superman be like? And he would be a very different Superman than the Superman that we know. And it would, to me, I think it would distract from the character. Whereas if you went with a Milestone character and a character that was created by Black creators to be those kinds of ideas are inherently built into the characters.
Right.
And that's why it's so weird when people are talking about, well, why can't Idris Elba play James Bond? And I'm like, well, one, he's too old, but two, he could play James Bond, and I think he could make a badass James Bond. But the problem is that's not the character of James Bond as it was created by Ian Fleming. And he was created to be a very specific character from the Cold War and all that. And you can change whatever character you want, but when you do that, I feel that suddenly the character's race and the fact that has become the forefront of the identity of that character.
Right.
And it's hard to get away. I think one of the best, and I use this all the time, but I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I grew up reading, and the Shawshank Redemption, or in his story, Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, the character of Red, played by Morgan Freeman in the movie, is a white Irish dude. Right. But his race was not really a big part of the character. You'd never know. So when Frank Darabont decided to use Morgan Freeman, and they even pay homage to the character, and when Andy Dufresne asks Red, well, why's your name Red? And he's like, why do they call you Red? And he's like, maybe it's because I'm Irish. I mean, they left that line from the story in the movie, and it just diffused that. But can you imagine anyone other than Morgan Freeman playing that part?
No, I can't. No.
And you know how many people complained about race swapping that character?
A lot.
No, zero.
Oh, no. Really?
Nobody cared. No, because if I'd read that story, I used to read it over and over every Christmas. When I heard that Morgan Freeman was cast, it didn't matter. And I'm like, I was like, oh, that's going to be great, because I remember seeing more. It's funny, Morgan Freeman, his first breakthrough role, he played a pimp in a movie called Street Smart with Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Who played a reporter, and nobody. If you ever said to somebody, can you imagine, the character of Red in Shawshank Redemption was originally a white dude. Nobody could ever imagine any other person but Morgan Freeman playing that part.
Yeah.
No one.
You're right. Because like when I watched that movie, it's funny, I watched that movie later on in life, but I kept thinking about maybe people complained about it because of, people complain about like, Hugh Jackman being, Wolverine, and then
he's 6 feet tall.
Exactly. And now they love him. They can't picture him without him. So now that you said it, makes me think like, oh, wow. Like back then, race didn't really matter as much, because I remember, I was very young when it came out, but I remember when the first Blade movie came out and how much that was such a big deal, and then, but Blade, like I look at Blade now, at least Wesley Snipes' version of Blade, I don't view him as a hero per se, but it is someone I would want to aspire to. And obviously when it came out, I was a kid, so I couldn't go to the theater and watch it, but I can only imagine a lot of Black people went to go see that movie because they saw themselves being represented in that particular genre. Which actually leads me into my next question, because you've been creating content, I want to say, since I think you said 2016 or
2015. Well, I started on YouTube in 2015.
Yeah, 2015. And my first time seeing you was on Collider, specifically Collider Heroes, and I know others have other people have seen you either from Collider, the Schmodown, and even John's channel. I wanted to ask, because you were on the Schmodown. What was it like doing that movie show, and like, I guess, having to know specific scenes, specific movies, even specific characters that were so diverse? Diverse in storytelling.
Oh yeah.
Like what was it like just having that knowledge? Because I remember you being on the show, and I remember whether it's a team match or a one-on-one match, you were getting them like this. And looking back at it now, like what could you take away from it?
Well, it's, to me, the Schmodown, it was very interesting, because when I first started on the Schmodown, it was pretty loose. It was pretty just kind of fun, like you're in a bar with friends having a movie trivia contest. And it was whatever I knew off the top of my head. And it was the knowledge people already just inherently had.
Yeah.
And it was fun. And I didn't feel any pressure doing it. I go, hey, this is cool. Then it changed, and it started to become really serious, and people started to study. And another problem with that was I'd seen, like, because I was older than most of the people on the Schmodown, I grew up at a different time where I had watched movies over and over and over and over again on cable and home video. But then in the last 20 years, say, of movies, I've seen far less movies, and I've seen them less times. Right. So I can't recite, like, if you ask me to recite movies from the 70s or 80s, I can do that. Or 60s or whatever, because I watched them. I grew up watching them and would watch my favorite movies over and over again. And when the Schmodown first started, the questions were much broader, and they had to be much more sort of I don't want to say surface, but sort of more general. because people they hadn't drilled down yet. But then once it became much more serious, people were studying. Well, I didn't have any time to study. So my ability to compete as a decent competitor was obliterated because I was too busy. I was doing other things, I was making movies or doing something else. So there was no way. And I was just getting smoked as a competitor. I started out as a good competitor, but then the game changed and I had so much fun with everybody. I mean, it was so much fun to go do the show. And at first it was very funny because it was Christian who came to me and he goes, you should be a heel. And I wasn't a big wrestling fan. I'm like, I don't know what that is. He goes, it's a villain. It's a bad guy. And because we were started to create these characters and then it was weird because suddenly we have characters that had storylines, which was very different than just sitting down and answering questions about movie trivia. And so I was a heel and I had this jacket. Christian said, you got to look up this guy, Ric Flair.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. I looked at Ric Flair. I'm like, I get that. And I had this jacket I bought for a Halloween costume like 20 years before that. I hadn't worn since like 2001. And it was I'm like, oh, I can wear this jacket and play this like larger than life Ric Flair persona thing. Yeah. And I did. And I think it was fun and people thought, but there's a lot of people that didn't like it. And it was funny because I could tell, and I never really thought about this when I was doing it, but I could tell because I was older, people looked at me, some people looked at me and was like, why is this like older dude doing this thing? And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, but Ric Flair was kind of older. He had white hair and, and I'm like,
right.
And I think there were a lot. I remember one day, I think it was Roxy Stryer, who I love. She's great. And I remember sitting down one day and we were waiting to shoot something because we'd shoot sometimes multiple matches a day. And then we'd shoot like Tagnino and I would go shoot our things together. And I was waiting around and I think it was Roxy who said, I didn't know that you made movies. Yeah. And it was funny. I was like, well, yeah. And I think I just finished editing this low budget sci-fi movie called Paradox. And I was telling her that it's, it'll air on Amazon and or Netflix, wherever it's been on both. And she was like, it was funny because we were having this conversation and she's like, then why are you doing this? I mean, that was the kind of implication. And I was thinking to myself, well, and I understand because, everybody wants to get into the film business and stuff. And for me, because I've done things like I've produced DVD special features. Yeah. And I was working on Lord of the Rings and I was co-producing Agent Cody Banks and I was going to do this and I was writing for a science fiction magazine, or I was doing all of these different kinds of things. So I never thought look, I'd love to be an Academy Award winning, very wealthy film director. I've never gotten there. I don't think I ever will, but you never know. It's still time. But I was at a place in my life where I was just doing the work that I've been doing for like 25 years. And Collider, when Schnepp asked me to do it, I was like, so wait, you're on YouTube? And I didn't really, other than watching movie trailers, I didn't watch much YouTube because it was all like girls doing makeup tutorials and financial advice. And some people I would build, or I would watch like people building model spaceships and watching them airbrush and stuff. And that was like my pornography. Ooh, somebody's done a video about how they're putting an Aztec paint job on this refit Enterprise. I'm like, yeah. So I didn't know what any of that stuff was, but a lot of people that were working in the YouTube space, especially in 2015, because to me, it's like second wave YouTube, the first wave of YouTube. There were all these content creators that had sort of become famous because they'd started in like 2009, 2010. And they were like PewDiePie was an early starter of that kind of stuff. And there were those creators that were really famous. And then Collider starting in like 2015, to me, I was in my own mind, I could be wrong about this, but I saw it as the second wave of YouTube when all of these entertainment channels had risen up, like Screen Junkies and all of this stuff. And Collider was definitely a part of that. So I was like, well, that's cool. And it was something for me. I never thought about getting into it. So going on to the Schmodown was all brand new. And I just did it kind of for fun. So I never was really serious about it. you know, and I wasn't looking at like my YouTube analytics or anything like that. And I think in a way that worked against me at Collider because I never got to know any of those people. And so I think that there was a lot of people that thought different things about me than were actually true. Like a lot of them just saw me come in wearing this stupid jacket, being like, "Hello, I'm the captain," and screaming and yelling. I can only imagine what people, especially like, you know, like when Emma Fife is like looking at me, and I really liked Emma Fife, but I'm sure I don't think she likes me now because of things that happened. But at first, I'm sure she was thinking like, "Who is this effing guy? Like what, you know?" And you don't. For me, because I would just show up for like an hour and leave. So I would put on this like persona and go away. So I wasn't seeing these people every day, so they didn't get to know me. And sometimes I would have like beef with somebody, like Clark Wolf and I would go back and forth on Twitter, and she didn't know me, and she thought, and I didn't know her, so she thought something I was saying was different than what what I really meant. And so there was a little bit of that conflict, and there's definitely, for me, it's weird to think, but I think there was a generational conflict there too.
Well, yeah, because I mean, when I look back at it, there's so many. The Schmodown covers like young and old. I mean, all of you guys are within your like 30s and 40s, even more. But I think you like seeing you and Schnepp and even Dagnito and Christian and Mark. You guys were the more seasoned people on there, and me personally, watching you guys, I learned a lot just about the importance of film. Like the reason why I love the Schmodown as a good like case study is because it's a game, but you realize when you're watching a movie, you're literally analyzing the story, the actor, the songs, what's the scenes. So that's what I kind of took from it. And what I loved about every time I saw you in a match, although you had the bravado of a heel, you knew what you were doing. You know, like it wasn't all talk. Like you knew what you were doing. But you know, I wanted to transition before we transition into your filmmaking career, because there's so much I wanted to ask you about that.
Oh, sure.
Real quick, before the first time I interviewed you, Collider was still a thing, and at that time he had already left. Now that Collider is kind of shut down and revamped, I was gonna ask, well, I mean, I would say, did you ever see that coming? Did you ever see Collider ever shutting their doors? Because I'm not gonna lie, like, you know, now that COVID has happened, a lot of content creators, unfortunately, like Screen Junkies has kind of revamped their thing. I think it's fandom now. Certain people left there, and you know, Dan Murrow's doing his own thing now. So it's like these bigger channels that were a thing kind of shrunk. Even IGN before COVID was a really big thing. Now it's kind of shrunk. Did you before? I know COVID was something that we really didn't foresee, but was that something that you kind of saw coming? And is that not necessarily the reason why you left and start your own thing, but did you know that something like that was probably going to come to an end at some point?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because like here was the problem with, like, for instance, to me, Dan Murrell is one of the most knowledgeable guys in the space. You know, he's a really smart guy, and he's a really nice guy, and I really like him a lot. And I think, you know, he was at Screen Junkies, you know, and like he cut a video about Star Trek: The Next Generation that's fantastic. But he was like the real deal. I think the real problem with a lot of these movie pundit shows, and now, again, I say this from my perspective, is a lot of the people this was an entry-level entertainment job. So even though you're just being a pundit, it was essentially like working at the equivalent of Entertainment Tonight, where, you know, you could get on and it was a follow-up to like G4. Like Attack of the Show. And if, by the way, I can't recommend Chris Gore's documentary Attack of the Doc more, because I think not only does it deal with Attack of the Show and that, but it deals with the dawn of what later became this YouTube pundit space as well. And so there was a lot of people looked at like Olivia Munn starting off on Attack of the Show, and then she segued into a movie career and on TV. And I think a lot of people that went on to these shows were hoping to do that. They saw being on YouTube as a way to transition on entertainment news shows, to transition into becoming either a filmmaker or mostly being on-camera talent. There was a lot of that thinking. Because like when I was growing up, there was no YouTube influencer, Instagram influencer, TikTok influencer job. That was something that didn't even exist. That's a phenomenon that's really only existed over the last, say, 15 years. So I think a lot of people, but the thing that I could see at Collider, and even though there was a lot of good people there, the problem is what Collider was missing was a staff of people that were just designing programming and dealing with things like marketing and advertising. It didn't have that. Like you had people that had worked in various things. Like when Mark Fernandez took over Collider, he had a lot of great ideas and stuff. But he didn't have what if Collider had a seasoned development staff and a team of people that was developing programming. And also here's another thing that I think that people underestimate. So I don't think Collider had at its core, it didn't have the strong infrastructure it needed to survive as a business.
Wow. I wouldn't have never known that.
Well, it had all the talent.
Yeah.
You know, but all the people that were running Collider were also on camera talent. You know, and what it needed was it needed somebody who was not on camera, that their mission in life was to take all of these talented people and utilize them in a better way. And then they did smart things, like they went after Jeremy Johns and they created the Awesome Tacular show.
Yeah.
But it didn't catch on the way that they had hoped. And this was not the fault of Jeremy Johns. I'll tell you, here's the big secret that I've learned from YouTube. This is the big secret I would tell any creator. People would say like, "Oh, Rob, not that, look, my channel's only got 62,000 some odd subscribers, and I could make it grow faster if I wanted to, but I'm too spread out." But here's the thing about YouTube. The people that watch YouTube, especially in the entertainment news or movie pundit space, they watch you because you're their friend. You're the kind of person they want to hang out with. And that's indeed what they're doing. When they come watch your show, if like, I'm no different than like talking to you right now, I'm no different than I am on my show, or if we're hanging out having a beer at a restaurant, or sitting on the beach sipping, you know, Coronas or something. What you see is what you get. And that's why it's very funny. I said this thing online a couple months ago where I said the great currency, I believe, of the 21st century for people, for individuals, is going to be authenticity.
Definitely.
Because we live in a counterfeit world. You know, to borrow a phrase from the To Live and Die in LA documentary. But the world, everything is fake. Everybody is currying favor for the tribe they belong to, the group they belong to. And the thing is, when you're on YouTube talking into a camera, people can tell if you're authentic immediately or not.
Right.
And now not everybody's going to like you necessarily, but the people that do like you, they like you because they believe in you. They like what you have to say. And they also understand that you support who they are.
Right.
And I really think that what happens is when these movie pundit spaces tried to become more like Entertainment Tonight or more like Extra or whatever they tried to become more slick. What they were losing was the authenticity of the people that were connecting through the screen that you and I are talking through right now. They needed, that's why people are interested in watching. And I'll tell you what's happened, another byproduct of my own channel. There are people that watch me. I could probably sit down and list about 50 people that watch my YouTube channel that I would consider friends. Like if they were in town and called me up and said, "Hey, Rob," now keep in mind, I've never met these people face to face. I've only interacted with them through my channel. But if they were coming into town, I would invite them. I'm like, hey man, you need a place to crash? Come stay here for a night. We got a guest room. You know, there are people I've met online. There's like Dieter Bastian, who I do my Let's Get Physical Media show with. Never met him. You know, I've never met him. We've been streaming now together for years. He's from Germany. He's from Saarbrücken, Deutschland. I consider him a good friend. You know, and we've never met. And that's something that I think that I've also been very fortunate to have, because how many people in this day and age, I mean, they talk about how especially like middle-aged men, there's a like an epidemic of loneliness and things like that, which I can totally understand. But for me, I can just turn on, if I'm feeling depressed or I had a shitty day, I can just come on and turn on my camera and be like, AMA right now, you know, and people would come in and suddenly, you know, that you'd be talking to somebody, and it's, you know, I think that's, and what happened is with these big channels, I mean, the thing about the Schmodown is you still got that personal touch, because a lot of us would go on these Schmodown fan channels and talk to people, and Christian and Mark had the brilliant idea of doing live events. So we do live events and then go meet people. And it was the same. Like, I would get stopped by people. It was so crazy. Like, I was at a Coldplay concert at the Rose Bowl, and I was with Elizabeth when we first started dating, and I got stopped by these people. You know, we're going to our seats. People are like, oh my God, you're Rob Burnett. And I'm like, at first I'm like, yeah, like I didn't know that I like, oh yes, they're like, oh my God, we watch you all the time. And I had to stop and think, like, you watch me all the time. Because when I would go and do Collider, I would go in for the hour and then leave. So it's not something I ever thought about other than when I rolled in and to do the show. So it didn't occur to me that, oh, people are watching me on YouTube like over and over again. And suddenly, because there was a guy, this happened just last night. I was in the grocery store buying dog food. And I literally, and Elizabeth asked me to buy some butter. You know, I'm holding this pallet of dog food, and I had this other stuff, and I could see like this dude is looking at me, and you can tell when people recognize you, and he's just smiling, and he didn't want to come up to me because I'm holding. I would have talked to him holding but he looked at me and he kind of gave me that whole, like, not the nod like this, but the up nod instead of the down nod, just the hey, kind of like acknowledging that he knew who I was. And it was fun. It was kind of neat. And I kind of felt like I always feel like I should talk to somebody. And I was at the T-Mobile store getting my phone fixed about a year ago, and a guy was with his mom and like his sister. He came up to me. He was like, "Oh my God, you're Rob Burnett," and I'm like, and his mom's just like looking at me like, "How do you know this old man?" You know,
you know, it's funny you say that. My YouTube channel is a little bit smaller, but I remember moving out here to Orlando, and we have this thing called Disney Springs here. I think you guys have that in Los Angeles as well. Disney Springs is like a little theme, like it's like a theme park within a theme park with Disney. But I went out once and just roaming around, minding my own business, and someone recognized me from my YouTube channel, and I was just like, I only have like 3,000 subscribers, and you recognize me. I was surprised about it. I talked to the person, he was really cool, but you don't realize how much of an impact you have on people until like you meet them or they reach out to you. So that's why I say like stuff like this is very important, because, you know, like I said, Rob, like I've been watching you for like literally the last 10 plus years, and having to interview you again is nothing but an honor for me. And which brings me down to your film career, because you've produced Superman Returns, you've done work with James Gunn, you've done work with some of the big wigs.
Well, I produced the documentary on the making of Superman Returns.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
Not.
Right.
I wish I'd produced that movie, but no.
That's definitely true. That's right. But you've also done some animated stuff on Netflix as well. I was looking at some of your credits in terms of the editing credits, and I was wondering when you got, well, I remember how you told me how you got started, but in order for you to keep getting more work in this business, how do you continue to market yourself for someone who wants to be like a producer or an editor in filmmaking or TV?
That's a really good question. I think that I have always been somebody that has sort of created my own material. And it's kind of like John Campea wanted to make a movie, so he made his movie The Anniversary Party, and then he wanted to do a documentary, so we did movie trailers, A Love Story.
Yeah.
But to me, again, I think the key to getting into this business, if you look at all the people we were talking about, like Spike Lee earlier, and if you look at all the independent creators, whether it was Kevin Smith or Steven Soderbergh or a lot of the Allison Anders or a lot of the filmmakers that came to prominence, the indie film scene of the mid to late 80s and the 90s, Quentin Tarantino, all of those people went out and made their own movies. And I think that that's what people really like. A lot of people, like, I love editing movies. I love being a film editor, and I never really went out and tried to get film editing jobs. They kind of found me. And I kind of liked it that way, because when you put yourself out there and you're marketing, and you don't get the job, there's rejection after rejection after rejection, and it becomes really disheartening. And for me, I just like to make stuff. So I've always had work beget work. I've been lucky like that. And I think that nowadays the tools and the technology exist. People can make, if you wanted to make an epic science, I keep thinking about like Gareth Edwards, who directed Rogue One, who has Creator coming out next month.
Yeah.
He made a movie called Monster that he spent like $15,000 on it, and he did all the effects himself. Really interesting sci-fi movie. And he makes it, and suddenly he put himself on the map. Or Neil Blomkamp doing he did that short, something in Joburg, which was about Johannesburg, that later became the full-blown movie, with Charlito Copley, the science fiction movie where the alien refugees come to South Africa. Why am I drawing a blank on it? Today I say I wouldn't be doing good on the movie trivia schmodown. You know what it is.
It's in the back of your mind now. It's funny, as you were saying, I was trying to find it, but I can't find it.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking. No, somebody's screaming at it. District 9.
District 9. Okay,
yeah, District 9.
Yeah.
And so, like, he started out and he made a short and was able to turn it into, get somebody interested in, make a District 9. And I think that, that's how people make their name in the industry. We just had the Streamy Awards this weekend, awarding YouTube excellence, and Mr. Beast won Creator of the Year. Yeah. Well, if you look at Mr. Beast, who's, again, an old school YouTube creator, the guy's like a billionaire.
Yeah.
And he started out with an idea, in his teens, and he created the channel and built it up and brought his friends in. And to me, we can do that now, because we have the technology. You have worldwide platforms, whether you're a Twitch creator, whether you're a TikTok or your Instagram or whatever, or even OnlyFans, if you want to go that way, like Drea De Matteo from The Sopranos has. No judgment. But the creators, you can now, like, if you make a feature film, you can promote it online for free. You can put it online for free, or you can submit it to festivals, even though that's become very cliquey and it's hard to make it in the independent film scene. But the only difference is making movies is really, 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 really hard.
It is.
And to make a good movie is even harder. And most people, especially younger people, and this is not a slam, when you can live in a world and become a world-renowned creator on TikTok or on Instagram, why would you even want to make a feature film? Why spend 2 or 3 years on a movie that people might not even see? Because I hate to say this, as much as I love movies were the art form of the 20th century. The 21st century it's going to be looked upon as, we now have the short form creations, and creators themselves have become the center of their art. It's a different art. It's It's different than what we had in the 20th century. It's participatory for creators. They're the ones creating, and it's just different. I don't necessarily think it's better or worse. It's just different. It's a product. Social media did not exist in the 20th century the way it exists now. So what you're seeing is just like cinema was brand new in the late 1800s and it exploded in the 20th century and became what it became. But even now, you don't have young people looking at they look at video games and they look at content that's being created now. So back to your original question, I mean, to market, the way to market yourself and all that is to do what it is you love doing and get really good at it, because the tools there, I can't believe, if I was a teenager, if I was like 10 years old when I was making Super 8 movies where you could shoot 3 minutes of film and then you'd have to take it to a photomat and wait a week to get back your reel of film, and you put it on a little projector and look at it to see what you had. I mean, that's when I first started making movies. That's what I had to do. And now, I mean, to have a 4K camera in your phone with multiple lenses.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. And right now, anybody could make a slick, I mean, you still have to have the talent and you have to know how to use the equipment. But I mean, from everything from 4K cameras to DaVinci Resolve color correction to all the different effects software that exists now, I mean, it's insane. But the problem is, are you going to put the time in? And that's always been the problem, or not the problem, the great sort of, that's the great democratizer when it comes to making movies, because making movies is really, really hard. And I think nowadays people have less and less patience to do it. Now you have some people, the horror film Talk to Me that just came out. That was made, two brothers in Australia cut their teeth making YouTube videos. They spent years making YouTube videos, really interesting stuff. They learned their craft and they always wanted to make feature films, and they made Talk to Me as their first movie, a movie made for very little money that's going to probably cross 40 million theatrically in the United States alone. Those people, they've cemented that they have at least 3 or 4 more times at bat, making movies. And if they play their cards right, they're going to be creators we're talking about for the next 20 years.
Yeah, I've noticed that YouTube in particular, but also, like you said, other platforms, has become the playing ground to do like fan films or like, own original films. I mean, the stuff that I'm trying to think Bat in the Sun has been doing for years.
Yep.
I mean, like stuff like Batman versus Darth Vader. Like, who would have thought of something? First of all, who would have thought Batman wielding a lightsaber, let alone fighting Darth Vader? That's stuff like that has just been amazing. And now they're doing their own original film with the late great Jason David Frank, the Legend of it's an original film. I can't remember. It's like Legend of the White Dragon. And I know that comes out I think by the end of this year, but just to see where they started and to where they are now is actually pretty cool. And which leads me to my next question. With the actor strike and the writer strike going on, I know you've been vocal about it on your channel and even on John's channel when you're on there. But I wanted to ask you, well, I'll say this. Outside looking in, I always thought if I saw you on TV or if you were on a prominent like YouTube channel, you made enough money to survive and put maybe something away, And when I heard Chris talk, it really humbled me, because to know that you're on TV and you're lending your body, your voice, and you only make enough to make your rent every so often, and then whatever bills you may have and pick up a second job, was mind-boggling to me. I mean, I know Chris normally does voice acting, and also I know she does on-camera work as well, but I didn't even know that if you did a video game, you only get paid for what you do. You don't even get residuals for that, depending on the game. Like, I'm just like, well, so I just wanted to ask you, what is your definitive take on actors? The SAG actor strike, and do you believe, and also the writer strike, and do you believe what they're asking is very reasonable? And do you think that this will end sometime soon? I mean, I think going into 2024, we're not going to have any new content until later on that year, given the circumstances.
Yeah, it's a great question too. See, I'm of like two minds about it, because like I've produced like Tango Shalom, for instance. Tango Shalom was a very low budget movie where a lot of people, it was a SAG movie, and it was very low budget movie, and I worked on that movie for 5 years to get it finished and out into the world. If you were to calculate how much money I made even just per hour from working on that movie, it's about 25 cents. I mean, zero money. Like, to be honest, I didn't make enough money to the last 2 years I worked on Tango Shalom, YouTube was paying my bills. I mean, making movies is so everybody thinks if you've made movies in Hollywood that you're filthy rich. And that just isn't true. Right. And if you look at most of the actors, like I have a friend who's an actor, a fantastic actor. If you look at his IMDb, he's probably been on 100 different TV shows, but he's been on like one episode. He's never, ever been cast as a series regular. And he's been on, you name the show, he's been on it. And yet he struggles because by being on one show, every time it airs, he would get a bit of a residual. That's how he would make his money. But that's the way the business was set up. And now what's the problem is TV shows used to have a revenue model built into them, meaning that when a show was on a network, they sold advertising for each hour that the show was on. You know, that if you had an hour-long show, you would sell millions of dollars worth of advertising, and that money was distributed amongst the people that worked on the show. Like the cast of Friends, if you were on a hit show that ran more than 5 years, if your show ran more than 5 years, that's when you started to get into the big money, because TV shows were made on a deficit. They were losing money for the first couple of years till they became hits. And after 5 years, you had enough episodes that you could sell them to foreign countries. And you could sell them over, like you could sell Friends to Germany and make a huge amount of money. And then that huge amount of money would be distributed amongst all the people that had a piece. The main actors would have a piece, the directors, the people, the creators of the show, the writers, they would get a sizable chunk of that show. And then you would sell it to Germany, the UK, France, Spain, Norway, whoever bought it, and they would pay a lot of money, and then they would broadcast it on their own TV stations. So there was a revenue model that is very different than now, because if you do a streaming show, you get paid once. There is no revenue coming in. Now, here's the thing. If you are on a streaming show, let's say if you make a Netflix show, let's say you're on a Netflix show and your show is a hit, and a lot of the people that have Netflix watch your show. Well, if nobody new subscribes, Netflix didn't make any money off your show.
Right.
It just keeps people coming back. Now, the streamers have been notoriously, they're not releasing their numbers. And the reason I think they're not releasing their numbers is, one, they don't want people to know, like Friends, Netflix famously spent $100 million to license Friends for 1 year in 2019.
Yep.
100. That means that was a show that was dead. It was over. It was on reruns, and people are still making money. But $100 million. Imagine if you made a product, and like right now we have Suits. The show Suits is huge on Netflix, and you have people writing. Like I wrote an episode of Suits, and I'm not making any money now. It's a big success on Netflix. Well, here's the thing: with Suits, the show went off the air 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You got paid. You were on the writing staff for like 8 years. You were making a good living on Suits, and then it disappeared. And maybe you get residuals if it went on home video or something. Well, now suddenly it goes on to Netflix, and you've got 1 billion hours of people watching it or whatever. It's not making any extra money. You know, Netflix, whatever they paid, whatever their licensing fee was, so they didn't get $100 million, but whatever they paid for the creators of the show, which was Universal and a few other production companies, if you had a piece of that show and you were owed money, you would get money distributed to you. Not very much, because the show is essentially dead. You know, and normally they would take old shows and put them into strip syndication, but Suits was done.
Right.
And so it gets put onto Netflix and people start watching. Now, what people are, and what the actors and the writers and the directors will say is Netflix is making money off our work.
So, quick question. Are they making money? Because Netflix just recently put out an ad tier. So, are they making money off the ad of whatever show that they watch? Kind of like, for instance, when Peacock launched, whatever tier you got, unless you paid for the non-ad tier, it always had ads. So I would assume every time I watched the show, they made money off that. Kind of like how Tubi, every creator that's put something on Tubi has made their money solely off ad revenue. So would you say they're making money off a show that's being rewatched based on ads, or no?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because they're selling ads. See, on a network TV show, you would have your ratings and demographics. You knew who was watching that show.
Right.
So you knew when Friends was on, you knew that, say, 20 million Americans between the ages of 15 and 35 were watching that show. So you could target, and if you had a product that appealed to 15 to 35-year-olds, the networks knew that they could charge you this much for that ad.
Oh, okay.
So it was all per show. The people bought advertising specifically, and that way they could keep their advertising rates up. Nowadays, it's the streaming service itself, like YouTube. When you buy ads on Google, when you buy ads for YouTube or whatever, you don't necessarily get to target a specific show. You get to target types of shows, and then Google places those shows based on where your product most would fit with their demographics. But they've got demographics across 25,000 different genre shows, you know, or whatever it is. So it's not, the money is not being generated by a specific program.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
So,
okay.
and so so for Netflix, for instance, so everybody's watching Suits. Comfort TV, it's easy, it's bingeable, 45 minutes an episode. You know, you blink and you've watched 3 or 4 episodes. But is anybody new subscribing to Netflix because Suits is on Netflix?
No, because Suits was on Peacock way before it was on Netflix.
Right, exactly. So the fact that a streaming service suddenly has all this success, and you even had a writer going, well, Suits is on Netflix and I only got a check for $250. My answer to that would be like, you got a check for $250 for something you literally wrote 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, what people want is they want to get checks that are bigger than those much more frequently. And the problem is the business has changed in that, I mean, and the thing is, Netflix paid a licensing fee to run Suits. So Suits has cost Netflix, I don't know how much, I would assume millions of dollars, because it's 9 seasons of a show.
Yeah.
So Netflix had to pay, they had to pay to run that show. So how is Netflix supposed to pay the writers?
Right.
Like they don't owe the writers anything.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. Netflix has also produced TV shows. So for instance, Netflix used to, like, Designated Survivor, the Kiefer Sutherland show about he became president of the United States. 2 seasons of it was produced by, I think, NBC. I think, and then Netflix, it got canceled. Netflix picks it up and they make a 3rd season.
Right.
Now, when they make a 3rd season, they have to subscribe by guild rules. So suddenly they're paying Writers Guild minimums. They're paying SAG minimums. They've become the producer of their own shows, in which case then they have to abide by those rules. But now the thing is, because Netflix doesn't sell advertising, they have different kinds of rules to abide by. And I think I think everybody should get paid a good living wage. The problem that I see is I think that the just like the music business, they didn't foresee Napster, and all of the guilds in my mind are playing catch up. And the biggest problem all these guilds have had is they're the ones that should have anticipated the rise of streaming 15 years ago. And they should have been approaching this differently, because ultimately at the end of the day, I think both SAG and the WGA, what if the AMPTP just says, now we're done with you guys. We're no longer, and then the only power that the guilds have is that, okay, well, you can no longer work with our actors. Well, eventually people are going to say, the streamers can say, okay, because how many people knew Millie Bobby Brown before she was on Stranger Things?
I had no idea who she was.
So absolutely nobody did. And that show makes her into a household name.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you can find, I mean, you go back to the streamers could suddenly, if they decided to, become an indie platform. And just say, okay, we're going to go back to our roots. We're going to go find Spike Lee or Steven Soderbergh or Kevin Smith. We're going to go find the Duffer Brothers, and we're going to have them start making content for us. I mean, you still need, I don't know if there's going to be that many people to find. I hope that doesn't happen. I want to see a strike be averted, because what the Writers Guild and what SAG does do, what the guilds are so good at doing, is making sure their constituency doesn't get exploited.
Yeah.
And that they do get paid, and that they do get their minimums, because any business where you're paying a human being, you're paying talent for work. Like, there's no product changing hands. You're paying a person to act. There's, other than acting in front of a camera, there's no manufacturing costs. There's nothing. So if you get somebody to act for you and then not pay them, what are the consequences? They're going to come after you and sue you with what money? You didn't pay them, so they're broke.
Right.
So it's bad. I mean, and I think the real problem is that we now have, like, I'm a firm believer in capitalism. People say that capitalism, it's the root of all evil, but it really isn't. The root of all evil is greed, and it's grifting, and it's criminal behavior. Capitalism works. But the problem is, as soon as you get into a capitalist system, people are like, how can we subvert this system and make more money than we're supposed to? That they allow a capitalist system to work, and then everybody gets cynical and goes, well, of course you can't expect a capitalist system to work because people are greedy and evil. Well, they are, but you can't base an economic system around that principle, because then everyone's like, well, let's be collectivist. Like, okay, you're all going to be killing each other in 5 years. That doesn't work. That doesn't work either. The 20th century stands as a testament to why collectivism doesn't work. And now you got all these people like, well, let's go back to being collectivist. I'm like, yeah, because you guys don't want to have jobs. It's hard. It's hard to go out there and work, and you want to be in a collectivist society and not have to do the hard work. Not to get into politics like that, but it really comes down to, look, I've never been paid fairly for my work. The only time I was paid fairly, I would say, was when I was working on DVD special features projects. Man. I made really good money. I made good money from Fox, from MGM, from Disney, from Paramount, from Warner Brothers. They paid me well, and they gave me exactly what they said they were going to give me. And we made a deal. We shook hands. We signed a contract, and I was paid well. That was the only time. And by the way, those are all studios. Yeah. I was a vendor for a studio. I was delivering a product that I was completely in charge of making. How I spent their money and what I did with it was my own business, as long as I delivered what I said I was going to deliver on this day. Sometimes I wasn't so good about delivering it on the day that I said I was going to deliver it on. I needed more time. But it was, here's what, and I have to say that I kind of think that might be a better way to go. That just pay people more, forget about the residual structure, because that way of doing business is over. Right. It's just a different way of doing business. I think people should get paid more upfront and be more valued, especially the writers, because all of these great shows begin with the writing and the writing staff. And the more you spend, I think, on your writing staff, and the writing staff needs to understand how to produce TV, because those people are all going to move through their careers. They're all going to graduate to eventually, hopefully, be showrunners, creators themselves, and they need an environment. And by the way, all these studios and streamers, you want to put up that extra money up front because you're creating a whole new strata of creators that are going to be serving you for the next 50 years. So the more you can keep these people happy up front and keep them creating great stuff, the better off you're going to be on the back end.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was saying, like, I think that what they should do is, like you said, pay them more up front, because at the end of the day, like, for instance, Disney is making more money by selling the completed product versus the actors and the writers who are making the product. So for instance, if you paid them more money up front, Disney's going to make that more, Disney's going to make their money if they put it in theaters, or if they sell it to a streamer, or sell it or with a licensing fee. Because, like, even what Zaslav has been doing about restructuring HBO Max, he sold off a lot of those titles. Like, for instance, the Batman animated series, I think, is now going to, I think, Amazon, and that could have been a Max thing, but he's getting a licensing for that. Sony sold off one of their well, they didn't sell off, but they gave a licensing fee to The Last of Us to HBO Max, when they could have done their own streaming service and produced that show.
Yeah.
So I see both sides. I do think network television, to an extent, is failing, because, like, I don't know anybody who really has cable like that. And the people who do have cable like that, they don't really watch it as often as they would, because if they miss a show because they're at work, they can always go back on the actual website like CBS and watch it. Or if you have Paramount Plus, you can go back and watch it. So I do think there is going to be a significant change. However, I do agree, though, I think if I'm a writer and like my show gets an Emmy or gets an Oscar, I should be at least paid a livable wage, where I'm not living paycheck to paycheck every week, or whatever the pay quarter is. So that way I won't have to necessarily struggle. But at the same time, um, we can get into personal choices, like, okay, what are you doing with your money when you get paid with that money? But then again, when you live in Los Angeles, I can only imagine the minimum rent in Los Angeles, like $2,000 in a good place.
Oh,
So
yeah, no.
I can understand it can be kind of tough. Yeah.
And you might only get paid once in months.
Yeah.
You're working, but then for me, my whole thing is, in order for me to make a living, I've always had to do 2 and 3 things at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm out there on it's really interesting, because if you think about it, like, I do YouTube shows where I speak extemporaneously for 2 hours at a time or something. Well, if I could have written that down, and I don't get paid for that. And
Right.
and no one's offered, the WG hasn't come to YouTube creators and said, we should make all of your shows. Of course, that would never happen, because then YouTube would just say, well, we're not paying any guild wages. So if you guys all wanted to unionize it, I mean, I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if YouTubers all unionized? But because
half of us are not being paid at all. So.
no, and we're getting, I mean, I think YouTube creators, especially longtime creators on the platform, on one hand, YouTube has created a worldwide platform that is free, that anybody can use. And if I wanted to, like, for instance, I self-published a comic book almost 20 years ago that's out of print. And I'm going to put it back into print. I'm going to run a Kickstarter and reprint it, and I just want to get it back into print. I'm not really necessarily looking to make a bunch of money, but if you're like a creator, I don't know if you know who Eric July is in the Rippaverse.
Yeah.
So that he did. So he spent his own money. And this is, I don't want people to like suddenly jump all over. I know there's some political things going on, and there's legal shenanigans, and people. I really respect what Eric July did, because he created Isom 1.
Yep.
And he spent $100,000 of his own money producing a 96-page graphic novel. And then he launched his own Kickstarter campaign and made millions of dollars.
Yep.
Then he shipped the product, and got it to people immediately. He did it, and he had the money, he'd already made the money in advance to print the product, completely bet on himself. He's a creator. And of course, when he makes that kind of money, you see all these people come out of the woodwork, and they have their resentment, and they're angry, and there's all this politics happening. But at the end of the day, Eric created his own book. He created his own thing. Or you look at Ethan Van Sciver, another controversial figure. Hey, he did. I have so much Ethan Van Sciver product just surrounding me. He did Cyberfrog, you know, and had great success.
Yeah.
And YouTube, if you want to go on your YouTube channel, and I'm going to be like, I'm going to promote the hell out of Reprinting Living in Infamy.
Oh,
And
definitely.
and I'm going to run a crowdfunding campaign, and I want to get. Would I like to make some extra money? Sure. But what I really want to do is just get enough money to cover the reprinting of work that was done 15 years ago and make it relevant for today, you know, and get it out there. And I didn't create it. I just publish it. And Ben Rabb and Derek Hughes, who are now executive producers on many TV shows, they wrote it. And, you can get it out there. So you can use the YouTube platform in many different ways to monetize your product. And so I don't mind that YouTube takes 30% of your super chat revenue, or that YouTube takes 50% of the ad revenue on your channel. Would I like to make more? Sure. But they're allowing me to publish whatever I want to publish for free. And if you want to work the analytics and really, really play that off, and I've watched people, get past, I mean, I've been doing it for 5 years and I only have 60,000 subscribers. I've seen people who've done it for a year that have 100. I want my YouTube plaque. I don't have it, but I want it. It's a goal.
You're going to get it. You're definitely going to get it.
I'm going to get my YouTube plaque. And then once you have the silver plaque, then it's like, well, I want the million plaque. And, I watched Tenacious D. Was it Tenacious D? They opened up they got their 500,000 and their million something at once or something. And I'm like, yeah, because what does that represent? It doesn't mean anything but money wise, but to me, it represents work done. Yeah. Like I have 5 years of me doing raw observations now on YouTube. And, if I had written a book, my memoirs or whatever, how many people would have bought it? 5,000, 10,000, maybe. Yeah, it would have taken me. But now I've got a legacy such as it is. I mean, you can look, if you want to know something about me, you can certainly see it. You can certainly see it.
Yeah. And, speaking of which, because we were talking about the strike and everything, I've noticed over the years of watching your career, speaking of watching you, you've had a particular take on the Oscars and how they view comic book movies. And I want to add, well, let me tell you my take. Okay. I personally think that the Oscars and their guild are very biased when it comes to comic book movies, in particular, the Best Picture category. Like, for instance, in 2018, I've always said that I think Black Panther or Spider-Verse should have won Best Picture over Green Book because they were most impactful and they were really good movies in comparison. However, I understand that Green Book was a good movie. And I've noticed just me outside looking in, and I know you're more seasoned, so I know you have a better perspective, but outside looking in, I've noticed that if you are doing a movie about a particular topic that happened in the past, like say slavery or a war or a drama or even a comedy, it gets nominated. Like Joker was nominated. But if you take, like, for instance, the Joker movie, I've always said doesn't necessarily, I don't view it as a comic book movie necessarily because it's about a man and his insanity. It really had nothing to do with the comic book origins of who Joker is. Although it's a great movie, you could have put Gray Man on that movie and it would have still been a great movie because it had nothing to do, I believe, with the comic book origins of Joker. So for me, I feel like the Oscars, when they see like Avengers Infinity War and they see like a Spider-Man No Way Home or even even something as recent as Across the Spider-Verse, do you think that they kind of overlook those films because they don't consider it cinema? I mean, we've heard a few filmmakers say it's not considered cinema, and that's their opinion. But do you think that the Oscars are biased towards comic book movies? Because I think, like, Dark Knight, I believe, should have been Best Picture, in my opinion. Black Panther, Best Picture, even Infinity War. I mean, people left Infinity War like they're about to like lose their mind. Like, is this the end of the MCU? And how did I not get nominated for Best Picture? I have no idea. But I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent. But I just want to know: do you think that that the Oscars are biased towards comic book films?
Well, see, here's the thing. As a fan of what I would call genre cinema, you know, any genre, science fiction, fantasy, horror, action, adventure, comedy, blaxploitation, you pick whatever your favorite genre of movie is. I think it all comes down to intent, and it comes down to storytelling, the value of certain kinds of stories. And I think that there are, like, for instance, if I'm reading Crisis on Infinite Earths, I'm not going to expect that, say, one of the world's great economists, or one of the world's greatest theologians, or one of the world's greatest military strategists, some military general. I think if I were to try and come and explain to them how important Crisis on Infinite Earths is, they would turn and they would say to me, what does this have to do with the real world? What is it that you can what have you gleaned about your daily life from Crisis on Infinite Earths? How is it going to help you interact with other people? How is it going to help you, say, build a investment portfolio that'll pay for your later in life? And I think when it comes down to it, what the Academy Awards, and indeed any awards body that is awarding storytelling in any of its myriad forms, is looking for, is how relevant is a story to the human experience. So when you watch this movie, what are you learning about what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean? How is it? And genre cinema, by its very nature, is dealing with a very specific kind of behavior, usually. Like I love horror movies, but horror movies, there's not a lot of horror movies that have come out in my lifetime that I would point to and say, this movie has relevance to the larger, outside of the horror genre, it has something to say. So I think the thing with comic book movies is, first of all, the people that they mean a lot to already have to love the comic book characters. Like we already have to be invested. And the MCU is, these are characters that we've known since childhood. So a lot of these characters go back to our youngest memories of things that we love. You know, putting a towel around our necks, running around saying we're Superman or Thor or whoever you want it to be. The problem is, what do those stories have to say to the rest of the world? Like if you're a 65-year-old retiree and you have spent the last 35 years of your life as a vice president of an insurance company, how is Infinity War relevant to your daily life? Is there anything? Is there? And now, I think that. Hang on, let me just say it. So we probably could come up with a good answer for that.
Yeah. Right. You're right. Yeah.
But what I would say is, like if you look at Green Book, the thing about Green Book is it's telling the story of a friendship between two people. Yeah. And when you watch Green Book, you can identify with either one of those characters. Do you identify like the jazz musician? Yeah. Do you identify with him? Now, he's a black character, but I identified with him because he's an artist.
Yeah.
You know, and he cares about what he wants to do. Now, the Viggo Mortensen character, I identified with less. But I understand what kind of a character he was.
Right.
And to see that two characters, two very different kinds of people, take race out of it, but two different kinds of people, an artist and kind of like, you know, a salt of the earth kind of guy, you know, that these two people that are very different kinds of people can develop a relationship of mutual respect and all that. That's something that I think, from a general audience perspective, my mom could watch that and get something out of it. Somebody from another country that might not speak great English could get something out of that. Now, the problem is, I try and show my mom Infinity War, and she's like, what is all this gobbledygook? This isn't real. What is this guy who's always going, shh?
Okay.
You know, the great Thanos. My mom would be like, what I don't understand any of this. How is this relevant to my life? How is it relevant to your life? How is it relevant to anyone's life? And so we as big fans can't conceive of anything but being relevant. But you have to ask yourself, is the greater society at large being well served by these stories? Now here's the thing. You could make the argument that how is any story? You have to have some kind of grounding. But I think that the filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, and you could turn around and go, well, Rob, Martin Scorsese's made lots of genre movies. I mean, he's defined gangster movies with The Irishman and Goodfellas and Mean Streets and whatever else. And that's true. He did work in what you could call genre movies, but those movies were firmly set in the real world. Yeah. And you had people that were toiling. I mean, we all understand what crime is. You know, crime has been with human society since the dawn of human society. Superheroes have not.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, when Martin Scorsese is talking about, well, I think superhero movies are the death of cinema. I think what he means is what is pushed aside. And I'll tell you something else. This Barbenheimer phenomenon.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that a historical biopic about Robert J. Oppenheimer would make $700 million? A 3-hour movie about a very significant historical event, but about one man for whatever reason. So audiences can still go. I mean, I think it's so interesting that, first of all, the Barbenheimer thing was created spontaneously by social media, which is wild. And at the same time, you at first it was just kind of funny, like these two movies that couldn't be more different than one another. But you put these together because they came out on the same day, you know, and they were very memeable, and all of that stuff happens, and suddenly you've got this crazy thing that this is what only in the world of social media in the last 15 years could a Barbenheimer thing ever have happened. It never would have happened otherwise. And that was spontaneously because it was memeable. It was funny. So they weren't just movies. It was a cultural event that happens once in a blue moon that people, but what I love about it is it shows that you can go see a movie, and Barbie is a much better movie. Once people get past all of the whole, well, it puts down white men or whatever. Once you get past all of that, it's actually a fairly interesting film that was made by it was written by Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig, directed by Gerwig, and Margot Robbie, whose career, you know, she's been in a lot of movies that haven't made a lot of money, but she got behind this movie. So, and then Warner Brothers got behind this movie, and Mattel got behind this movie. And so to me, it's a Hollywood blockbuster the way they should be made, where you actually have really interesting creative talents behind the camera. You have a studio supporting their vision. And then you have a company that's allowing their product to be the core of this film. So that was great on one hand. But I don't think Barbie, I mean, it might be nominated for Oscars because it made so much money and all that. But the thing about Oppenheimer is exactly the kind of movie Martin Scorsese wants to still be made. And it was made. Yeah. It's just that if anybody is watching, and I'll tell you, to be honest, I mean, I think about how I was as a 16-year-old fanboy in high school. Yeah. I was reading as many books as I was seeing movies. I was going to see all kinds of movies. I was a movie fanatic. I was going to see foreign film. The highlight of my life was the Seattle International Film Festival, which happened in May through June for about a month. And there were movies from all over the world that I'd never heard of. I would get a full series pass. My parents would give it to me for my birthday because it was May 15th. And that would be my big birthday present because it was like $200. And they would get me a full series pass so I could see every movie that played at the Seattle Film Festival for a month. And I would see movies I'd never heard of from all around the world. And I would meet filmmakers, and I love filmmaking and I love storytelling. I think one of the great problems now, especially I see in the fan community, is people are not watching a diversity of stories. Yeah. And part of that is because when I talk about being in high school, that was 40 fucking years ago. So there's been 40 more years of more stuff to watch. Yeah. And when I was a film fanatic and got my VCR, it was possible to see every horror film and every science fiction film, at least from a major studio that was made back all the way to the 20s. you could
Mm,
see them all. So, and I
mhm.
was already a science fiction, fantasy, horror fanatic before Star Wars came out. You know, as a 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-old, I was really into it. So you could go back in and you could see all of those things. Now it's impossible. Now there's
Yeah.
a million things. Like I watch all these reaction channels, like um whether it's a voice coach, like is it the Compassionate Voice? There's this really cute woman. She's adorable. That she's a voice coach, and she goes back and watches music, and
Mhm,
she hadn't even seen Led Zeppelin. I'm like, you hadn't seen Led Zeppelin? Like what?
mhm. Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, there's all these reaction videos where these kids are fans of things, and like, this is the first time we're going to go watch Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. I'm like, oh my god, what?
Mhm, mhm.
Because you know that movie it's 41 years old,
Yeah.
and if you were born in 1990 and you started really watching movies realistically, and you became a fan in 2000, why would you go back and watch a movie from 1982?
Yeah.
And much
Yeah,
less
that
go
ma
back and watch Casablanca from 41
right.
or
Or
39, Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. Why would you do that? There's
yeah.
already, you can't even keep up with everything that's coming out now.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. I mean, it's funny you say that because, like, now that you said that, it made me really rethink. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, if you take myself out of the box of what I love about my favorite characters, how do they apply to the average person's everyday life? And then also when you go back and when you watch previous films, like, you brought up Barbenheimer. I mean, I love Oppenheimer, and all that movie is dialogue. There's
Yep.
no hand-to-hand combat. There's no, it's just good writing, and that's what I loved about that film. And when I think about films like that, I think about how creative as creators we can be and pushing those stories. So yeah, if Oppenheimer does get nominated, which I assume it will be, I would definitely want to vote for it if I was a part of that board. But also, I can't also ignore the fact that Across the Spider-Verse was just a really good movie,
Yep.
and I would put that up there too. But to your point, like, okay, how many people are really going through multiple universes running from another version of themselves, which is not happening at all. So I can kind of I see that point of, okay, how could you apply that to, aside from the morals of that movie of don't let anybody tell your story for you, versus, okay, well, that's true, but there isn't anyone who's literally in the same spot as me trying to stop me from becoming me
Right.
all the time. So like,
Yeah.
so I now that I look back at it, I'm like, oh, okay, I see the mindset of it, but I still would consider, those movies, comic book movies, science fiction, things of that nature. Those are cinema. If you're able to put together anything, it's cinema. Just like if you were to do something like a Barbie or an Oppenheimer or even like a Ninja Turtles, that's cinema to me. But you being the creator that you are, I wanted to ask this question. Over the years, you have been very vocal about the MCU, and sadly, with Phase 4 and even going into Phase 5, Kevin Feige is starting to lose his touch. I wanted to ask, well, it's like a two-part question. One, did we did did we did we see this coming with the expansion of Disney Plus? Because I like to point out, when they tried the streaming thing with Netflix, with the Netflix series, even though they were disconnected, like, I remember Daredevil and even Jessica Jones mentioning that, okay, the Battle of New York actually happened,
Right.
but
Yep.
so they were canon, but not really. It didn't make sense. But now that Disney Plus series are very directly connected to certain things, did we see that the dilution of, or what would you say? Did you see it coming where Kevin Feige was essentially telling these stories about specific characters that are ultimately diluting the MCU? Because right now, if I'm being honest, although the Marvels is coming out in a few months, I was excited about it last year. I'm not excited about it now.
No, I have
Um,
no, it's funny. I never thought I would say this. Even looking at the trailers for the Marvels, I'm like, I have no interest in this movie at all.
exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think the reason I have no interest in it is I don't have any sense that why are they telling that story? I don't have a sense of what it's about. I don't really care, other than these three women are exchanging whenever they use powers. Like, what does this have to do with anything?
Mm-hmm.
And I watched a really interesting video, and I forget, I tweeted it out. This guy did it was another YouTube creator that I didn't know. And he was making the point that, you know, all the MCU movies all fed into one another in phases 1, 2, and 3. And you would see the same characters come in and interact with one another. And you really got the sense that you were watching this overarching story unfolding. And you were. You know, Black Widow was introduced in Iron Man 2 and then continued on, and you'd see her interact with these characters, and somebody would cameo in this movie, and you felt like you were watching this very much this expanding universe. Well, and all the way up to, look, I think that Infinity War and Endgame, if I think back to all the science fiction, fantasy, and horror movies I've ever seen in my life, those two films together as one long are some of the most entertaining 5.5 hours of film ever. Yeah. If you're a fan, in terms of delivering on what they promised, like, I remember sitting next to John Schnepp, man. I was sitting next to John Schnepp watching Infinity War. And first of all, we were already excited about it. Yeah. But I felt I was sitting next to, we both felt like we were 5 years old. Yeah. I kept looking at him when shit would happen and our eyes were like, we're just like, fuck yes. I mean, we were losing our minds. And when we got to Vormir, and you heard the Hugo Weaving sound alike doing the Red Skull voice. Yeah. John and I looked at each other. John was like, he looked like his head was about to explode. Yeah. He was like literally going, the Red Skull. I mean, it was, and he didn't live to see Endgame. Yeah. And one of the great, you know, when I think back in my life, like, I don't have that many regrets. There are mistakes I've made that I learned from, that I would sure have gone back and done things differently, but I don't lament. I don't sit there and, but one of the things that I really regret in my life is that I did not get to see Endgame with John Schnepp. And people are going to say, well, Rob, Endgame was kind of a mess compared to Infinity War. And I'm like, Endgame tried to do a lot of stuff, and I think for the most part it worked. I thought it was a huge swing, and for the most part I thought it was that movie's incredible, from the time it opens with Hawkeye's family disappearing, to hearing Mr. Fantasy over the Marvel logo, to then being in space with Tony Stark thinking he's dead. I mean, everything about that movie, the tone is different. The scene where Captain America comes in, and when Steve Rogers comes in to talk to Natasha, hey, I saw whales, you know, in the East River today. And they're talking about what they're doing. You really got a sense it's 5 years later. That movie does so many, I love it. And I know, okay, there's big plot holes. I'm like, okay, I get it. Fine. But when I was watching the movie, I'm like, I was captivated, taken away. And those two movies together are so satisfying. Yeah. You know, they're so satisfying, and all the stuff that happens. And I wish that John Schnepp, because he would have, what Infinity War and Endgame are to me, what they represent to me, was as a kid growing up reading Marvel and DC comics. I mean, as a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old, going to 7-Eleven and buying Slurpee cups with those characters on them. I would never have thought that as a half-century-old man that I could go to movies like Infinity War and Endgame and see literally these characters, same with Star Trek, have gone on this journey literally for my entire life. They've meant various things to me over my life. But to see something that was so wildly entertaining as those two movies, and then you think, well, how can it not continue to be this way? But when you start watching Phase 4, there's no connectivity between anything. And there's they try and do it, but it really, if you go from WandaVision to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, it kind of goes into a cul-de-sac. I mean, it's like, why is Doctor Strange the only person that knows about Wanda? Exactly. Where's the rest? I'll get you back on the lunchbox. What lunchbox? Who are the Avengers? Like, and none of it. I'm asking this question. So, like in Eternals, you have deviants running around, and Eternals are fighting them in the middle of London.
And no one says nothing.
And then Arshem the judge shows up at the end, like this gigantic celestial 3 times the size of the Earth is there speaking, and we're all hearing about how humanity, after the Thanos snap, after all the stuff that's happened, it's almost as if nothing has happened, because the whole Earth is like, whatever. I mean, what would the religions of the world do? What would the Pope say if the Pope got snapped? You know, the snapping happens and half the Vatican disappears and the Pope comes back after being gone for 5 years. How is the Pope going to reconcile to all of the Catholics on Earth what just happened?
I mean, I would think that they, like, the civilization would be revolting against superheroes because they kind of attracted this thing to happen, you know?
I mean, insane. And that's what I think the MCU has completely, as they say, lost the plot. And like, I really enjoyed Shang-Chi.
I loved that movie.
I loved it. It was so good. And it was like watching a wuxia movie from China that I used to love, martial arts fantasy films like Zoo Warriors, The Magic Mountain, that John Carpenter kind of used as inspiration for Big Trouble in Little China. I loved Shang-Chi. Where's Shang-Chi been?
Yeah.
Like, nowhere. No one's talking about him. No one's talking about anything. You know, Wong was bouncing around and all these, and I'm like, okay, the MCU worked so well because these characters were showing up, and as this video pointed out, these characters weren't gone for more than a year or two before they came back, and we knew they were coming back, and everybody was intertwined and all that. I mean, we don't even know who's in the Avengers.
We don't even know who the lead, like, people are still calling Sam Falcon. Like, they don't even acknowledge him as Captain America, which is strange. Like,
so yeah, it's listen, I'm being summoned away for dinner, and I have to feed the old dogs.
Oh, okay. So but yeah, that was my last question. I wanted to ask you about that, but I do appreciate you being on the show.
Oh man, this is great.
I'm glad I could talk these things with you. But where can we find you on YouTube and also social media?
Yeah, you can find me on my YouTube channel, which is The Burnett Work, like a network after me. And then I do my show Robservations. I'm going to do one tonight. And you can find me on Twitter at Burnett RM. You can find me on Threads, and you can find me on Blue Sky at RM Burnett. You can find me on Facebook at my name, and I'm on Instagram at RM Burnett as well.
Awesome. Rob, I want to appreciate you for being on the show. Thank you guys who tuned in and came in to watch. You guys follow me on my YouTube channel, Momentum Media. You type that in, that's the first thing that pops up on YouTube. Also follow me on my multiple social medias, which I'll leave in the link in the description below. Rob, I want to thank you once again for being on the show. It was good to have you. And
thanks for your great questions. This was awesome. This is a great show.
Oh, anytime. And for the rest of you guys, have a blessed day.
It's great to see you.
Yeah.